I love the SEGA Saturn. I was one of 2 kids in my entire school that I knew of who had one, and it's the console where my love of arcade racing was absolutely cemented. I really dug the OG port of Daytona USA, but it wasn't until I tried that demo of the forest track from SEGA Rally Championship that everything changed. I'd pick an arcade racing experience now over almost anything else because of that demo. I still don't drive in real life, but a good arcade racer doesn't demand that you do. I like it when arcade racers lean into their own logic and leave the real world behind. I grew up with the SEGA Saturn, and every PAL arcade racer I could get my hands on, I did. I ended up with a large collection of Saturn games that eventually expanded into the Japanese library of games too. So yeah, I look back at the Saturn as a console with some of the best games around, and for me, some of the best arcade racers around too. Unfortunately, I sold off my collection a while back, partly because now I live in a tiny house and I just wasn't up for all the space that it took up. Also, the collecting market that popped up around retro games and the SEGA Saturn really put me off from being associated with it. So I did a lot of soul searching and eventually came to the conclusion that it's the games that matter the most, not what you play them on. SEGA Saturn emulation was in a pretty good place when I sold off most of my collection. I kept my original Saturn unit in the hopes that one day I'd be able to run my backups on it. We're at that point now, luckily enough, and while I haven't had a chance to ready my Saturn for the launch of this channel, the Beetle Saturn core in the multi-system emulator Mednafen has been a lifeline while I wait for that day. In fact, a nice CRT shader thrown over the top and a retro-bit SEGA Saturn controller in hand really brings the experience so damn close to the real thing that I don't feel like I'm missing out at all. Purists will tell you that for retro games, real hardware is the only way. Pirates will tell you real hardware is dead and there's no need for it because emulation exists. Then others will tell you that FPGA solutions are the other only true way to play. Well, I'll quiet all of that noise down right now and clear up any confusion. No matter what you'll be told out there by many different people with many different opinions, whatever way is convenient for you and fits into your budget is the one true way to play. Besides, it's fun to tinker with emulation, which brings me to this video right here. What follows will not be an in-depth analysis of frame generation tech, because talking about it at all will already age this video like milk. So instead, let's just look at this as really just an excuse to show off and celebrate some amazing SEGA Saturn arcade racing experiences. So what's going on here then? The footage you'll be seeing in this video has all been captured directly from my Asus ROG Ally X running Windows. I've used the Beetle Saturn core in Mednafen to play the games, apply the CRT look, and I'm also using a program you can grab for a very small fee on Steam called Lossless Scaling. This essentially makes the games display at 60 frames per second. Frame generation is a relatively new technology that, when employed, can create the illusion of higher frame rates in games. It's basically frame interpolation, creating interstitial frames between the frames that already exist. What this means in this instance is that using lossless scaling enables me to take these 30 frames per second SEGA Saturn races and make them visually 60 frames per second. Because the game is running the same and all of this frame generation happens post-gameplay, whatever you employ on it will still feel like it's playing as intended. It doesn't change the physics or the way the game plays, it's purely visual. In fact, because this happens post-gameplay, it creates a little bit of additional input delay on top, which will not be ideal in some instances. For some games, it really isn't an issue. For others, it'll render them unplayable, at least in my experience, due to the additional input lag. So lossless scaling and frame generation in general are not a magic bullet. I don't feel that there are any games here that really actually truly benefit from the additional frames. But it looks cool, and it gives us a look to what could have been, and also to what we have to look forward to in the future when it comes to tech that could be useful for enhancing retro games via emulation. Frame gen as a technology is very much still in its infancy, and if we're lucky, we will continue to see it evolve and get better and better. We could see it become another valuable emulation tool, just like CRT shaders and run-ahead frames have. Who knows? So using lossless scaling is very easy. Simply run your game in a window, click scale, and then click on the game window, and yep, in a couple of seconds it just works. So for the sake of science, curiosity, and just showcasing some fantastic Saturn races, let's crack on with it. Nissan presents Drivin GTR is the Japanese version of the original Need for Speed. It replaces all of the cars that are in the Western version and makes them all Nissan makes. This one plays pretty well with lossless scaling enabled. I didn't notice all too much input lag. I mean, it's definitely there like in every other case, but it doesn't stop the game from being playable at all. Yeah, I would recommend giving this one a crack. F1 Live Information is the Japanese version of F1 Challenge. This was one of my favorite games growing up, and when I owned a Saturn wheel, I realized just how well this game was tuned for that peripheral. The input lag is pretty good. I didn't notice it too much. I found it a bit twitchy because of the analog controls, but this one's pretty good and it looks really, really nice. So give this one a go. Drift King 97 has possibly been my favorite experiment with the SEGA Saturn and lossless scaling. This one plays pretty slow generally and plays really well with the analog 3D control pad. And also the wheel, it plays really good with the wheel. But with lossless scaling enabled, that 60 FPS look is really, really nice. and the input lag is not very noticeable in the moment-to-moment gameplay. I think this may be the one game that I may just keep playing with lossless scaling enabled. Alright, so a couple of the 2D superscalers. First up is Power Drift. This one ran at 30 frames per second originally, and I think it suffers a little bit in regards to visual clarity, but it's nice to see what a 60 frames per second Power Drift could have looked like on the Saturn. I would call Gale Racer one of my guilty pleasures, but I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I just like what I like and that's it. I enjoyed this on the Saturn, and even though it's not an amazing port from the arcade, I still had a lot of fun with it.
Go!
And here's one I was dying to try. Sonic R is one of my favorite racing games. I love the fact that it kind of controls like a more bouncy Wipeout. I was really disappointed when I tried out the lossless scaling with Sonic R. Something about their input lag just made it feel horrible. It feels really, really delayed, and you can tell from my gameplay. I was missing corners and jumps left, right and center, and it just didn't feel right. It looks really cool, but I would avoid playing it like this.
You know you
So Daytona USA, the original Saturn port. So this one's a bit funny. Because the game runs at 20 frames per second, Lossless Scaling actually has a ×3 frame rate generation mode. So I was able to up the frame rate from 20 frames per second to 60 frames per second by using that ×3 multiple. But unfortunately, the input lag it introduced was so chronic that it was unplayable, completely unplayable. I did manage to run it on the attract mode just to show the differences here. And yeah, it still doesn't look great. But yeah, it's a curiosity, and what could have been, huh? Scorcher is one of the quirkiest racers on the Saturn. It's gobsmackingly gorgeous. It always was, it still is. The art design is amazing. The music is brilliant. And the gameplay is bizarre, but really, really cool when you get down to it, I think. I would recommend playing this one like this because Scorcher has a weird inertia to the controls anyway, and I don't think the small amount of additional input lag really mucks with it too much. So I would say give this one a go. Manx TT was one of those games that I never really adored as a youngster. I really, really liked it, but it wasn't one of the Saturn races that I kept going back to time and again. It looks really nice. The additional lag is noticeable, but it's not game-breaking by any stretch of the imagination. So give it a go, you might like it. Road Rash is an interesting one. It looks pretty neat, but the extra input lag makes the bike very, very heavy to control, which in turn makes it very, very difficult to avoid oncoming cars. So yeah, this one may look cool, but I probably wouldn't recommend playing it like this. At this point in history, what else really needs to be said about Sega Rally Championship? Not a lot. And with the 30th anniversary having just passed, I thought I'd lead out with one of my favourite things in the entire world, Desert Replay. The amount of times I've just sat back and watched my Desert Replays because of that music. I love it. Well, enjoy. Thank you very much for watching this far. And if you like what I do, please consider subscribing. You can also leave a comment letting me know if you've tried this out yourself, what games you've tried it out on, and whether it's been worthwhile. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Happy New Year to you all.